So today I wanted to talk about one of the, literary tropes that really, I understand their purpose, but it also gets on my nerves, and that's the magical Negro. Now, for those of you that don't know, the magical Negro is a literary and cinematic trope where a black character is introduced into a story primarily to assist, guide, or save a white protagonist. Now, these characters more often than not possess some type of supernatural abilities, mystical wisdom, or just extraordinary intuitive insight. You know, typical of the old man, old black woman giving great advice. Now, their powers and knowledge are never or rarely used for their own benefit. Instead, it's used to serve or help the white character resolve their problems or to assist them with some type of personal growth. And I think about, obviously, we know the Green Mile and Legend of Bagger Vance are two of the most prominent magical Negro tropes out there. But then I also think of the black character in To Kill a Mockingbird as well. So, what are some of the characteristics of this trope, and let's explain them. Like I said, you have the sacrificial nature, which is when the black character will often sacrifice their own well being and safety, even their life, to assist the white protagonist. And they all feature a lack of depth. That character's backstory, desires, agency are either non existent or very rarely explored, and they truly only exist to support the central white character's narrative. There's the supernatural and mystical elements where the character frequently possesses powers, wisdoms, things beyond human understanding that they use solely to benefit white characters. And then there's subservience, where the characters are always portrayed in a way that reinforces the idea of black servitude, usually echoing these type of historical racial hierarchies. So, like I said, common depictions: the wise old black man or old woman who offers sage advice. You have the mystical healer, the shaman, who uses their powers to save or aid the white character. You got the sacrificial figure who dies for the moral or physical salvation of the white character. And I think with Green Mile, the character fit into two of those. I believe he was not only sacrificial, but he was also the mystic healer. And then in Legend of Bagger Vance, I'm trying to remember, but he used his mystical and natural abilities in order to help the white character progress in the story. And I think something that I really love about black books now is how we are kind of reclaiming our own supernatural abilities and, showing them how they can be used for both good and bad, but it's no longer used to further a lot of white character stories. And I like to think that the use of the magical Negro trope is slowly dying away, and I hope it is. I truly hope it is. And in my mind, there are so many reasons why this trope has been dangerous. Especially when I just mentioned how it gives a stereotype of racial hierarchies. That's only one of them. So here, let me kind of go into why this is dangerous for a minute. And I think it's important as authors and even readers to understand: are you really going to be okay with taking away the agency of an entire group of people? It robs black characters of their humanity. It really reduces them to tools or plot devices, which I hate. It denies them the opportunity to be complex, flawed, and really fully realized human beings within the story. Like I said earlier, it perpetuates racial stereotypes. It enforces that outdated, damaging stereotype of black people have to be subservient helpers whose value lies solely in the ability to serve white people. It denies agency and autonomy. These characters, like I said, rarely have their own storylines and arcs. They're plot devices. Their sole purpose is to elevate the white protagonist, and it does not leave room for their own needs and goals to be explored. It also undermines representation. And while the trope does include black characters, it does it in a way, that censors whiteness and sidelines black identity representation without any meaningful inclusion of the black character. And I think for me, the purpose of even having this discussion is really to highlight why this trope is harmful and outdated. The historical context and this ongoing negative implications of the trope and how it's used in literature and media and how it's so damaging to the perceptions of African Americans. But there are examples in both literature by black and white authors on how this trope is employed and how black authors have kind of subverted or avoided it entirely but still use a version of it. There are alternatives to this trope. We can craft black characters who are fully realized individuals with depth, agency, autonomy, characters who are integral to the story beyond their interactions with white protagonists, while still, if they have to, help those white protagonists. I think addressing these points with this type of discussion can really challenge kind of the outdated storytelling practices and encourage readers, authors to demand more equitable portrayals of black characters going forward. So let's start off with the books that do it wrong. The Green Mile by Stephen King is one of them. I love Stephen King, but So, if you don't know about the Green Mile, a black man, John Coffey, is on death row and he possesses supernatural healing powers. Despite his innocence, Coffey ends up sacrificing himself for the emotional and moral redemption of the white prison guards, particularly Paul Edgecombe. This is a problem because Coffey's character is reduced to a mystical savior. His supernatural abilities and his tragic, sacrificial death really exist solely to teach white characters lessons about morality, humanity, and justice. And why on earth do we need the death of a black man sentenced to death row for a crime that he did not commit teach white characters about their own humanity? I just feel like there's so many other ways that that particular storyline could have been written. But I know white people ate it up. Book number 2, another one I already mentioned, The Legend of Bagger Vance, by Stephen Pressfield, yet another Stephen. So this story revolves around Juna, I think that's how you pronounce his name, a white golfer struggling with his game and his past. But he's guided by Bagger Vance, a black caddy with seemingly mystical wisdom about life and golf. Why is this a problem? Because Bagger Vance has no personal arc or agency. His sole purpose is to serve as a spiritual guide for Juna, and his supernatural advice elevates Juna's journey while his own life remains unexplored. Again, we know nothing really about Bagger Vance because everything focuses on the white character. And I've never seen the movie, so I don't know if they even explored anything further. As a matter of fact, I've never seen the Green Mile movie either. I've just read both books. And I like to say that was before I knew any better, but I was in high school at the time, or right in college. So I was just interested in them and read them. But there was a reason I never wanted to see the movies, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But I think as I've gotten older and realized more about these tropes and how harmful they are, I am glad that I have stayed away from the movies. Now, this one hurts me to my core because I love To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It's one of my favorite books. I even love the movie. And Tom's character is not explicitly supernatural, but he is falsely accused of harming a white woman, and this accusation serves as a moral compass for Atticus Finch and his children. I think his story is really centered around an unjust trial and eventual death, and it's a problem because Robinson's humanity is actually overshadowed by his role as a victim whose suffering and death serve to highlight the heroism and moral growth of the Finch family, and his personal thoughts, motivations, his desires are even barely explored. And then he dies, and it's like, can we get more? And I think it's my desire to get more from either Atticus or, from Tom's family or Tom himself is really what kind of made me be a little cringe about Atticus, but I also think sometimes I go overboard, but I'm not done. I have more books. So I was actually going to talk about The Help and the Secret Life of Bees, but I feel like Those two are pretty self-explanatory, and they don't really play on so much of a magical Negro trope. So I'm gonna skip those. I had to take a pause for a minute and think about what I wanted to say about those. But yeah, I think they would kind of be put into another category. So I'm going to skip talking about those two for a minute. But something I do want to discuss is the denial of humanity, and this thing of stripping black characters of their own complexity and desires and their personal arcs, and even so far as placing them in subservient roles where their only value is to be of service to others. And what that, I think, with those books being written in the time period that they were, what it does is, like I said, outside of reinforcing this stereotype that black people do not have their own issues, they don't have their own desires, is that it really does add another layer to racism and how black people are not seen as human beings. They're reduced to this role of constantly being there to help their white counterpart do better in life. And it just takes you back to slavery, and how they, you're not treated as a human being. And I know now I seem kind of at a loss for words, because as I sit here and talk about this, it's putting me in this place of how authors to this in 2025, 2024 are still driving these narratives home. And I did a video back in November, December, where I said, authors, white authors especially, please give your black characters their own subplot. At least if they aren't the main part of your book, at least give them a subplot, or don't include them at all. There is no need to write their character in a way that furthers the white character without ever exploring any of their own humanity. Because when you do that, it comes across as a missed opportunity. You're not giving the black character the chance to explore the richness of their life, their own story, their culture. You're not giving your reader to see black people in that way. You're also ignoring them as kind of their potential as a protagonist with their own goals. And for people who say, oh, I don't see color, I don't see this, that, and the other, it continues to allow them to live in their own bubble of whiteness, where they don't have to acknowledge that black people are complex. And I get it. There's this discussion going on in BookTok right now about white white authors not writing black characters, and they should not write. Like, if you can't do it, do not under any circumstances, because there are plenty of black authors out there who can write black characters that are complex, that have their own personal autonomy. But for the ones out there who dare try it, at least put more effort into it, instead of doing this lazy, this black character is here to push our white characters around. And this is not to bash Legend of Black, Bagger Vance, Green Mile, or even To Kill a Mockingbird, because those are considered classic stories, but I think we need to reconsider why they are deemed classic. Why were these pushed to the forefront as great literature in one fashion or another? Is it because the black person became kind of a sacrificial lamb, or because it allowed the white characters to have this aha moment of morality? Or were they truly good works that could stand on their own head? Could you remove the black skin of that character and make it a white person? Would it still have that effect? And I don't know about you, but it really just reinforces this notion of systematic racism. It normalizes the idea that black people are helpers, that we're sacrificial figures in a white central narrative, which then in turn makes us sacrificial figures in everyday life. And since a lot of what we read kind of reflects everyday life. This just continues to mirror real world systematic racism. Black labor, emotional support, and our sacrifices have been historically exploited for the benefit of white individuals and institutions. Henrietta Lacks slavery. And the only thing you're doing is repeatedly portraying black characters in these roles in media and literature and trying to normalize the expectation that black people should prioritize the needs of others above their own, which again is why the 92% thing is so important, because letting people know that we are going to prioritize ourselves. And the visceral reaction that so many people out there had when black women said that they were stepping away. This is why it's important to be mindful of how you write black characters, because the only thing you're doing is reinforcing this narrative that y'all are supposed to be there to help when we say it. If we tell you to jump, if we tell you to be on the front lines, you need to do it. It's expected of you. It's furthering a mammy role. And I'm sorry, I don't want to read something where my worth is tied to how much I sacrifice of myself and how much I can give to others without helping myself. And just going back to something I said earlier about hindering racial progress. The stories that have the magical Negro trope, they always try to claim that they champion racial harmony, but they do it in a way that centers white saviorism. And it absolves white characters of guilt without having to address systematic issues. Hello, Atticus Finch. And it really allows white audiences to feel comforted rather than challenged. It allows them to sidestep conversations without any real world racial inequality and injustice. They don't have to face any of those uncomfortable demons of their ancestors. It's always, well, this character did this, so, it can't be all that bad. And again, the real world effects of this is that it is a repeated portrayal of black characters as subservient or sacrificial. And all it does is reinforce real life biases influencing how black people are perceived in the workplace, media, daily interactions. It really discourages the creation of nuanced, multifaceted black characters in popular media, and it really limits us to stereotypical roles. And while there are places like that are challenging that now, that are getting rid of that, we still have so far to go, because a lot of white people have ingested, taken on the stereotype, whether it's unconscionable bias or not, but I think the damage that a lot of these works have done over the years, it's going to take a few generations to even break away from that, when we stop looking at these works as, the pillar of literature and start looking at them for what they are: harmful stereotypes towards black Americans. And trust me, I hate saying that about To Kill a Mockingbird, but I feel like I can still like the book and love it, but also recognize it for what it is, which is harmful, because there are so many others that can be put in the place of To Kill a Mockingbird, of The Legend of Vagabonds, of The Green Mile, and not be offensive towards an entire group of people. Now, there are books written by black authors who use this trope well, and I want to go over two of them. And the first one is The Water Dancer. Now, The Water Dancer does a great job. Sorry, it's by Ta-Nehisi Coates. But The Water Dancer does a great job at subverting this trope by giving the protagonist, Hiram Walker, agency. He is black, and he's the central figure in this narrative. Hiram is a former enslaved person with a unique power called conduction, which is tied to memory and heritage. So his journey is all about reclaiming freedom for himself and others, and not serving or sacrificing for a white character. It also focuses on the black experience. The story is very deeply rooted in the realities of slavery and African American experience, but it uses magic not as a tool to aid white characters, but as a metaphor for power of memory, resistance, and liberation. And then when you look at the complex world building surrounding it, the magical system is tied to cultural and historical themes of African American identity, particularly the strength and resilience of black families and the communities. It avoids a reductionist view of magic as some type of mystical gift given to black characters for another person's benefit. And honestly, if you read it, that's why I think this is such a better book compared to Green Mile or Legend of Bagger Vance. And we'll just use it as a comparison to Green Mile, because Hiram's magic is not a plot device for a white character's growth or salvation. Instead, it's, deeply entwined with his personal journey and his broader fight against oppression. I think the story centering around black agency and autonomy and the complexities of black identity, while offering a counter narrative to this simplistic depiction often found with the magical Negro trope. He's not imprisoned. He's not, all of these other things that fall into a stereotype of black people when you are looking at the magical Negro trope. And that's, if you've never read the book, I highly recommend that you pick it up and give it a try, because it's one that I deeply resonated with, especially when I talk about healing and spirituality. And I can, use this book as for that topic later on. But it's something when you are trying to reclaim back what was lost to you through trauma. I think this book does a great job of that, using the magical or the mystical aspects of it. Now, another book that does a great job at this is A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow. And why both books just happen to be dealing with water, I have no idea. But okay, so this book does a great way at subverting the trope by centering black girls. It follows two black teenage girls, Tavi and Effie, and they have to navigate a world where mythological creatures like sirens exist. Tavia is a siren, and her magic is not in service to anyone else. It's a symbol of her own identity, voice, and power. There are themes of oppression and resistance, but this deals with the siren myth kind of reimagined as a metaphor for silencing black women. And Tavia's magic is seen as both feared and understood, while paralleling real world issues like systematic racism and misogyny. The narrative doesn't allow her powers to be co-opted or diminished by the white characters. Now, there are complex relationships, because it does emphasize that the bond between Tavia and Effie, while showcasing kind of a nuanced exploration of black sisterhood. The girls' arc itself does focus on growth and struggles, but it does not serve to kind of accessorize the white characters' journeys in the story, if that makes sense. And what I love about this is, using the siren slash mermaid metaphor and allowing it to reflect back into the real world, something that I feel like a lot of stories written by both black and white authors sometimes fail on. But what I love about A Song Below Water is that it hits on it perfectly. And if you are somebody who can read between the lines and really understand what the purpose of the book is trying to get across to you, you'll pick up on that immediately. And even just using those two stories, and there's a lot of other books that I could have discussed, but just by using black characters as protagonists in a magical Negro trope, the stories are told from the perspective of those black characters. It centers their lives, their experiences, and their agency. And what this also does is that, magic is more personal and cultural. I think the magic in both books is more so deeply tied to the black identity, the black experience, and it does serve as a metaphor for empowerment and resistance and a community, rather than some type of mystical solution for another person to gain fame or to come to their own kind of moral reckoning, so to speak. And it also gives for a lot of rich character development. Both books avoid flattening their characters into tools for someone else's growth. Instead, they're able to explore their own internal conflicts, their desires, even their own story arcs with more depth and nuance, while giving an honest critique of oppression, something that the other books, while trying to, sidestep the oppression going on in it, these stories use magical elements as a critique of systematic racism, gender oppression, historical erasure, and, they offer a more modern and socially conscious approach to fantasy, something that the other books I think want to do, but they don't come close to it. And so by centering these black characters and rejecting the notion that black people exist to serve others, I think The Water Dancer and A Song Below Water really stand out as kind of this powerful example of how we can subvert outdated tropes and craft richer, more equitable narratives that really benefit us all, that don't play into these stereotypes, things that should be put on the list for classic literature, for things that should be taught in classes, so that we can begin to help change the landscape and the stereotype of what you expect from African Americans, from black people. I think by putting more of these types of stories out there in schools, on reading book lists, being taught as a part of curriculum. And honestly, I hate to say it, but it does take white media also taking a look at these books and praising them for what they are, great literature, in order to put them out there. And there have been plenty of authors that have been, their books have made it into great literature. And again, I can talk about those because some of those, they center abuse and harm and things like that. And we don't always want to go through that. Sometimes we just want we want to highlight black joy. And again, by allowing mainstream to pick up these books and feature them and talk about them in a way that celebrates blackness and not subjugates us, I think we'd be all the better for it, right? But yes, that is, I didn't mean to talk this long, but that's my opinion on the whole thing. I think the magical Negro trope is definitely outdated and something that should be revamped and revisited. And that's not to say that the books that have used it in the past should be gone away, but I don't think that they should be continued. I don't think they should continue to be praised when there's so many other books out there that are better. And now that we have already determined that that trope itself is harmful to the black identity. Either way, thank you for this week's discussion. I hope to see you guys next time. Bye.